I'm waking up, I feel it in my bones, enough to make my system grow. Welcome to the new age, to the new age, to the new age, to the new age. Whoa, 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 I'm radioactive, radioactive. Is it wrong to sing before a World War II movie? It's like juggling before talking about Schindler's List. Anyway, welcome back to StillerBros at the Movies, where today we are talking about the movie that a lot of people have been waiting for. It's fantastic. It's the wonderful popcorn movie of the summer that it's going to make everyone happy. Oppenheimer.
Yes. So obviously, Oppenheimer has had a lot of build up to it, partly because it is a Christopher Nolan movie, and Christopher Nolan has an audience.
Christopher Nolan is one of the rare, still remaining name above the title directors. You don't get a lot of that anymore. Steven Spielberg, maybe. Martin Scorsese, definitely, but you don't see a lot of name above the title directors anymore, because the studios have kind of started to treat them like hired hands for the most part.
Yeah. So but this is the deal for. This has a little bit of an interesting stuff going on. For starters, we have the fact that this is the first Christopher Nolan movie in a while that has not been picked up by Warner Brothers.
Yeah, it's weird that. So the thing is, Warner Brothers kind of had Christopher Nolan on the payroll for a long time. They have been close with Christopher Nolan for a while. Then new management back in 2020 decided, hey, we're going to start releasing all of our movies day and dates on the same at the same time on streaming and in theaters for 2021. Christopher Nolan did not like that, particularly because he's been a big proponent of theatrical releases.
And he especially for the reason that Tenet came out in the middle of a play at the height of the pandemic, which is the reason why we never saw Tenet in theaters.
But obviously Christopher Nolan was very much a guy for the creators in this case, where he literally said a lot of creators came in thinking they were going to get theatrical releases, and then you just kind of screwed them over and gave them a day-and-date release where their box office numbers are going to get majorly hurt. So obviously Christopher Nolan decided, I'm not working with Warner Brothers, at least not with this new management. Don't know if that's exactly how he's feeling, but right now he has moved on to a different studio, Universal.
Yes, and he made a big agreement, but this time around he has a big movie. There's a big movie with big stars, because it is a 3-hour epic starring where if you look at the cast listing, it appears that every single character with a speaking role in the movie is played by a at least known actor. We have Oscar winners like Rami Malek and
Matt Damon, Kenneth Branagh,
and then we have two of those for writing, but still. And then we have people like Robert Downey Jr. and Florence Pugh, and then we have smaller actors but known nonetheless, like Josh Peck and Scott Grimes.
Josh Peck, on the other hand, allowed me to do the joke that we have been holding on to since we heard he was cast. I bombed Hiroshima! But the important thing is that this is a movie where it feels like Christopher Nolan pulled out all the stops to make something huge.
The fact that he basically came in and said, one of his conditions was a $100 million budget and an equally large advertising budget on the film did not hurt. And of course, taking his big step into the lead role of a Christopher Nolan movie, we have Christopher Nolan regular Cillian Murphy.
And it's just something that Cillian Murphy has been in 6 Christopher Nolan movies so far, and this is his first starring role in one of them. And someone on Twitter pointed this out, and I thought it was kind of funny that one of the movies that Cillian Murphy was not in was a movie about a guy who specifically is in pain because he's separated from someone named Murphy. Just thought it was funny.
Yeah.
But it's all But it's all leading up to us talking about the fact that this is a biopic about the father of the atomic bomb, Mr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who we don't know much about because we are uneducated morons.
We also, the last science class we had where they talked about him was almost 15 years ago. Fuck, we're old.
But all we know is that he's known as the father of the atomic bomb, and that's about it. Also, the Death Destroyer of Worlds speech that he is infamous for giving, and the fact that he eventually regretted his work on the atomic bomb by creating like the ultimate super weapon, as anyone with a conscience probably would in a scenario like that.
Yeah.
And because it's just, and for the record, we did build an atomic bomb. The reason that Japan was rebuilt as quickly as it was because the bomb exploded in the air.
You'd think we wouldn't have to say that. You'd think we wouldn't have to try to state facts about history, but surprisingly, a lot of idiots still exist in this world.
It is the year of our Lord 2023, and idiots like us need to point out that real things happened that we have public records of. Happy anniversary to the moon landing that also definitely happened, by the way.
Yeah.
But all this to say, Oppenheimer is basically Christopher Nolan going for a deep, dark, kind of depressing story, but the question is, will it be like that all the way through? Time will tell for us, but it's also the fact that it's got this fantastic cast. Ludwig Göransson is working with Christopher Nolan for the second time ever. After Tenet, he's seeing a big thing where Christopher Nolan is talking about how he didn't use any CGI shots, which I'm just going to get on my soapbox here. CGI is not a problem. CGI is a tool which can be used or misused. And any bad thing you can say about the worst CGI, you can also say about the worst of practical effects. And anything you can say about the best of CGI, you can say about the best of practical effects. I'm not crapping on this movie already, because I'm just simply saying that if your whole problem with CGI is just it was made in a computer, then get the stick out of your ass and just realize that practical and CGI are just tools that can be used or misused by whoever is using them.
Then again, we're talking about a guy who will watch junk foods, who will freely admit to the fact that he watches and enjoys junk food cinema like the Fast and Furious movies and MacGruber.
Yeah. Christopher Nolan is... The thing about Christopher Nolan lately, at least in the interviews we've been seeing of him as of late, is the fact that every time he seems to be in something, one of these interviews, he's saying something that makes us endeared more to him than just the idea of, oh, he's just kind of like this good factory level machinist when it comes to his movies. But he likes junk food cinema, so he's not a pretentious cinephile. He is very supportive of the SAG and WGA strikes that are going on at the moment, so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And just the funny quirk that he does not own a cell phone and he does not have an email address, so the only way to get in contact with him is through his wife, so thank God she runs his production company.
Yep. It's just Christopher Nolan sees himself as fancies himself an interesting fellow to watch and admire. And
it's just kind of fun to continue to learn more about him as this movie's press junkets keep going on. Or at least what little press junkets they can do with just the director.
Yeah, because he is the only member of the cast and crew who can actually do press junkets at the moment.
Pay the writers, pay the actors, for the love of God. This should not be hard. It's hard. You're losing more money than they're asking for every day. You're not just giving them what they want. Please, for the love of God, end this strike so we can get excited about movies coming out again. But yeah, I think that's all we've got to say about Oppenheimer without actually seeing the movie. We'll see you guys again in about 4 hours when we have seen the movie. We're getting dinner first. The movie's 3 hours.
This is a 3 hour long movie. We're getting food first.
Yeah. So, see you guys after the jump. And so on the other side of it, Oppenheimer is a really compelling and fantastically made movie by a master of his craft. But what else was there to say? It's a Christopher Nolan movie that understands exactly what it needs to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Nolan's best. We admittedly have not seen all of Nolan's filmography, but it still manages to be a movie that, despite the fact that about 98% of it is guys in rooms talking about politics and science, to subjects that really are not all that interesting if you're not the kind of person to be into that it makes it feel compelling, especially when Nolan remembers to occasionally add a little bit of a directorial flourish to something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of visual flourish, especially in the first hour
and the last half hour.
Yeah,
especially. It's an interesting way of going about it, where Nolan spends the majority of the movie going through for this hyper realistic style, and then occasionally he will have, when it feels like it's time to go into Oppenheimer's head a little bit, he will go through some spectacular visuals or just visual representation of something through the eyes of the character.
And it doesn't glorify what Oppenheimer did, because obviously Oppenheimer spent the remainder of his life infamously regretting his involvement in the creation of the atom bomb.
But I guess we need to make that clear for people, because some people think that just making a movie about Oppenheimer's work and the work of the Manhattan Project in general is somehow glorifying it, when we all know that a weapon of war like this is not really something that we should take lightly, and clearly Christopher Nolan is not one to make a pro-nuclear war movie.
Yeah, but there's a lot to say about this. We can get into it a little bit. Part of it is the fact that the two MVPs of this movie are Robert Downey Jr. and Cillian Murphy.
Robert Downey Jr. is playing a character who is who you just kind of pay attention to for the fact that, one, he's basically the narrator of half the story, and two, because he's just so compelling in it. He plays he's not playing Tony Stark. If anything, he's playing the opposite of Tony Stark in this movie. He's very much playing he's not the smooth talker, quip his way out of any situation kind of guy. He's kind of the scheming, backstabbing, guy who plays both sides of odds.
And because there are two POV characters throughout the entire course of the movie, part of it being told through, a good majority of it being told through Oppenheimer's perspective, but occasionally we'll switch to Lou Strauss's point of view, which they do visually by switching to black and white.
It's very clear when once you get used to the switch back and forth, it does become abundantly clear. Okay, this is what Oppenheimer saw. This is what Strauss saw. This is what Oppenheimer saw. This is what Strauss saw. We say the same scene about 3 different times from both their perspectives. Including the fact that we are eventually given the idea that Strauss may or may not be an inconsistent narrator.
We do, because we see it from both their perspectives, as well as the fact that we see it when more details about it are laid out in front of us. So we're sitting there watching it, it doesn't feel repetitive in a way. In a way, it does not feel repetitive, but at the same time, it feels like we're revealing stuff, just going back and seeing the same thing play out again.
And one thing I like about Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer, and just the fact that he's written in such a way, is when you think of tortured genius who's a scientist who ends up going through a lot of the stuff that Oppenheimer would have to go through, you kind of don't picture a guy who you picture the aloof genius, the guy that you always that we have gotten, that's just become a trope over the last few years. The Sheldon Coopers, the Sherlock Holmes, the guys who just...
The savants.
The savants who never got the hang of social interaction.
Possibly on the spectrum, definitely antisocial, want to make everybody around them want to strangle them. That's not how Oppenheimer is characterized.
Oppenheimer is characterized as a brilliant man, but not a perfect one. It occasionally falls into that old biopic trap of oh, he's so brilliant, he's miles ahead of everybody. He's everybody be happy with this man. He's practically the most brilliant special boy. But also, it is well aware that Oppenheimer was an imperfect person who fell victim to a lot of pressure throughout the course of the Manhattan Project and beyond.
We especially see that in his relationship with his wife, Kitty, played by Emily Blunt, who in the movie is portrayed in a way that her and Oppenheimer weren't exactly together because they were just so passionately in love with each other.
It was abundantly clear in the movie that at least they cared enough for each other that they stayed together despite the fact that she knew a lot of bad things about him and kept the relationship going despite it. But the movie also does not have a lot of energy for its female characters. But I think that's mostly because there's not a lot to do with these characters who didn't do a lot on record.
This is not one of those biopics where there's a deep love story at the core of it. This is entirely based on just a bunch of white men sitting in rooms talking about politics and science.
And that's the thing that makes it, and the fact that they can do visually interesting things is awfully compelling. Next, I think we should talk about things like Ludwig Göransson's score, which wonderfully accentuates the violin use, which I fucking love violins, so I would just love that anyway. And then Kenneth Branagh is in this movie for his brief appearance as Niels Bohr, which at times sounds a lot like Kenneth Branagh doing his best as Werner Herzog impression. By the way, looking forward to A Haunting in Venice with all the excitement I can possibly muster for it.
Yes, and a big thing this time around is the sound design, because we have explosions, especially during the Trinity test. The sound design was a great way to build tension.
It's especially telling that they remembered the detail that bombs go off, but you don't exactly hear the explosion until a few seconds to a minute later, and it's just a kind of a neat detail to remember. No, you see a bomb go off, but then you hear the explosion because the sound has to travel.
Yeah, it takes that into account, and it uses it to build up a lot of tension. So when we get to the actual scene of the Trinity test itself, we just get a quiet moment watching all of this happen. On a brief side note, we have been binging through The Boys right now, so when Jack Quaid shows up, it is a little weird.
For the record, I think Chris Nolan's brief time wading into the pool that is comic book movies might have left him with a little bit of lack of restraint when it comes to setting up the next thing in the franchise, as it were, because in the last few minutes of the movie, there's very much moments like The Dark Knight Rises. You should use your real name more often, Robin.
It's very much one moment in particular that feels like we're name dropping something from the source material,
where it's just
that it may be setting up something that could come back around.
Which is just like, hey, this is important. Except the difference is that it's not for a future movie or a deep cut comic book thing, or just Christopher Nolan's reinterpretation of it. That it's the history. We're setting up history.
We're setting up history. Things we already know will happen. Granted, we don't know what Christopher Nolan's next movie is going to be, because he's not actively developing anything until the strike is over.
Until both strikes are over.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens.
But once again, studio heads, you have the power to make the strikes go away by paying the writers and actors.
Yeah, just pay your goddamn writers and actors, and then this all goes away.
The only reason that I think that I am hopeful that what we're doing right now is not scabbing is the fact that we're not technically getting paid for this.
Yeah, we're also obviously not in the guild, in either guild, and I don't think this will affect us trying to get into either guild.
So, but for right now, Oppenheimer is a brilliant movie by a brilliant director. And no, we're not exactly the kinds of guys who worship at Nolan's feet, but I don't think I've seen a movie of his that I've genuinely disliked.
Yeah.
And so it's just a movie that feels like Nolan at his most Christopher Nolan.
Even if it is not exactly the the high concept sci-fi stuff of Interstellar or Inception or Tenet.
It's just basically Christopher Nolan doing the Patton Oswalt routine of sitting down in his lazy boy and getting really obsessed with World War II for some reason.
Yep.
But for right now, that's it. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with your friends and enemies, and don't forget to tune in next time when my job is beach.